Hey everyone, and welcome back to the 1v1 series and our final match in the second round. After this, we're into the quarterfinals. If you do enjoy today's video, consider subscribing. Today we're going to be using our 4 different categories to rank 2 killers. The first category is called Equipment. This category comprises a simple aspect of the characters, considering their clothing or armor, their weaponry or lack of, and finally their power. Simple. The second category is called Speed. This category looks at their agility, movement speed, attack speed, and proficiency with performing their power. The third category is called Efficiency. This category details the killer's ability to fight. It comprises looking at their core strength, their resistance capability, and their endurance. Finally, we have the category called History. This is where we look into the lore and identify the things or people that this killer has already previously faced, and make a judgment based off of that on how well they'd perform in a 1v1 as a result of prior skill or encounters. Each category is getting scored out of 10. This is for a total point score out of 40. Same as before, the higher number wins. With these scores and my own reasoning for each of the numbers, we will decide who I think would win in a 1v1 fight. I'm going to try and be as objective as possible and be without any bias. The goal of this series being a search for the strongest killer in the game. Today we are seeing who would win in a 1v1 fight, the Spirit or the Oni. Okay, so jumping right into equipment. We're going to look into Oni first, as his equipment is actually mostly literal equipment. He of course has his sword, which is like a katana, and then also his kanabo, which is an incredibly sturdy weapon capable of taking down armored opponents. So 2 very strong weapons basically. He has a full set of armor also, and 10. Yep, 10. Oni might be the easiest 10 for the equipment category. He has very strong weapons, a full set of protective armor, and a power that grants him a considerable amount of power, with the small cost of blood, which he can collect with ease. So yeah, 10 for Oni. This category is like made for him. The Spirit on the other hand may first appear as the complete opposite, but I actually want to award her a 10 also, as she has a very powerful loader that aims to make her light but strike hard and out of nowhere. Her armor or protection comes from the fact that her limbs are actually detached. If they are to get sliced again, they'll likely just reattach to one another unless the blow is fatal. Further, she also has a katana, which is shattered, but again it means that if Oni clashes with her sword with great force, it can simply reconstruct itself. It's not a one and done situation. She's the second chance queen. Finally, her power makes it impossible to hit her, and much is the problem that she has in games as a survivor, you can't tell where she is coming from. Her distance, she can't be counted basically, which applies here too. So starting off strong, 10 for them both. Different kinds of equipment, but both very strong. Okay, so on to speed. Right off for speed, Spirit does have a slightly slower base speed of 4.4 meters per second to Oni's 4.6 meters per second. However, both of our killers here have alternative movement speeds. For Spirit this is 7.04 meters per second, and for Oni this is 7.82 meters per second. So Oni is quicker, although Spirit is invisible when she uses her power, but just speed wise, Oni is definitely the faster of the two in terms of literal movement. For agility, alternatively, the opposite situation happens, as Spirit appears to be the much more agile of the two. She has very little restrictive clothing, detached limbs that float and move freely. Her weapon also comes out of her arm, which makes it even easier to summon but also retract freely, allowing her ease of movement throughout as it's not going to be getting in the way. It's not too clunky basically. Only alternatively, due to the fact that he's carrying 2 heavy-ish weapons, both of which he is always carrying, aside when he goes into his Blood Fury and his sword dissipates. He's also wearing large armor that sure gives protection, but is going to restrict certain angles and movement. With that said, he's a big guy. He can handle the weight, and there are gaps within the armor joints that allow free movement for him to keep up with Spirit. Finally, for power proficiency, they're both in the same kind of area for this, as both seem to have gained their ghostly powers upon entering the entity's realm. If they did have them prior, they would have had a while to acquaint themselves with it. They do incorporate weaponry into their powers, both again are seemingly skilled with these, so I want to say there's an even proficiency due to their power being mostly entity given and weapon based. I want to give Spirit the slight upper hand in points here with 9 to an 8 for Oni, as her agility to me seems much more significant just because Oni has his armor. Spirit has no restriction and maybe more freedom due to her limbs not being attached. untouched, giving lots of freedom and movement. Okay, on to efficiency. For this category I want to say right off that both of them I believe to be very resistant, with again Spirit's cut up limbs and glass shattering and piercing her skin, and Oni with different cosmetics that show him covered in cuts and pierced with arrows. Especially given their ghostly status also on both parts, they must both be quite resistant in terms of damage, especially attacks from another katana. Strength, Oni is clearly the stronger of the two. He has beefy muscles and is just basically physically larger. Rin is a teenager, so she's going to be quick and capable of striking hard and fast, but not so much direct strength. Finally, endurance. We know from the lore that the Oni remains on the battlefield effectively just cutting through everyone. Definite tick for endurance. We can talk about that more in history. Rin looks to be in good physical condition, and further the fact that she has already suffered many katana blows and has continued, plus the emotional pain evident in her lore, shows a certain kind of endurance. 8 for Spirit and 10 for Oni. Oni is clearly the more efficient fighter of the two, but Spirit is going to hold her own when considering how her power could be used also. Alright, so finally onto history. Let's cover Oni first. It's mentioned in the lore that he fights many warriors as well as farmers posing as warriors. It's described as a dark pilgrimage as he goes from place to place, effectively brutally slaying people, tearing off their top knots and stripping off their armor, to the extent that people believed he was possessed by something dark and otherworldly. He then gets the nickname Oni Yamauka, and it just makes him mad basically, and he continues murdering people. Further, he kills his own father, a samurai, and then goes on to massacre another town, 10 by the way, and further another 12 samurai and then a few dozen farmers wielding weapons before he is finally taken down. Spirit on the other hand has a slightly less bloody history, primarily including her years as a student. Comparatively to Oni, she would appear to have a much less significant history for a 1v1. I'm sorry Spirit, it seems that you don't quite have the same level of experience as your ancestors. In her core lore, she comes home to her father cutting up her mother, followed by being cut up herself. It's really brutal and horrible honestly, but basically every cut you see on Spirit is one she managed to survive while she was being attacked before finally being taken by the entity, before she could get up and fight back. In her tome lore we can clearly see an inner rage which drives her to learn how to use a katana. She goes to lessons and ends up beating up a bunch of bullies, who, a lot like the Oni, called her a name she didn't like. It seems they share some similarities, I guess. I'm saying 6 for Spirit though. It's hard to deny that Oni clearly has a much more bloody history against professional fighters. Rin has rage and drive and some technical skill, but Oni is the clear outlier for history. So this brings our final scores to 33 to Spirit and 38 to Oni. So yeah, Oni wins and will be returning for the next round. Round 3 or the quarterfinals. That's right, we're nearing the endgame now. Here's the final update of the round 2 table. And now it is time for the description of the fight. There was a chill in the air, colder than usual as the two Yamaukas arrived on the family estate. Kazan stood in his hulking armor, staring pitifully down at his descendant Rin. She twitched awkwardly and summoned the katana from her wrist. Oni reached for his kanabe but stopped himself. He'd make it a fair fight, test if she really had the same blood as him. He took 2 hands to the katana and raised it, the Spirit still twitching ahead of him. He began to slowly pace forward toward her when a sudden pain jolted through his stomach. The rattling of a blade retracted as he swung back. The Spirit was there, her sword bloody and a twisted grin on her face. She had phased. Oni felt the wound and roared, swinging the sword down. It crashed with Spirit's, but the blow was too strong for her to hold. It shattered the blade. But the blade reassembled quickly. Oni swung again, but Spirit would block, each time the blade smashing but reassembling once more. Finally he swung with all of the force he could summon. The blade came crashing down, breaking through it and slashing into the Spirit's shoulder. Oni absorbed the blood, letting it empower him. He roared out, grabbing his kanabo and slamming it down onto the Spirit, expecting the crushing of bones. He was surprised to hear the thud of the weapon colliding with the floor. The Spirit came out of a phase and leapt onto his back. With full rage he fell backwards, trying to crush her with his weight. She clambered out the way, and when Oni swung and cut off her heel, it, like her sword, reattached quickly. Kazan stood up and looked at her ancestor. She was worthy of his blood, but she had to die still. He ran at her with great force, swinging his katana, smashing it and smashing it repeatedly until she had fallen to the floor and could find no more strength to summon it. He removed his mask as she glared up at him, fear in her eyes. His sword flew down. This was nothing new to him. Alright, so we're now into the quarterfinals for the 3rd round. We have 4 matches next round and 8 killers remaining. Again, if you'd like to see any changes to the scoring system for next round, then do drop suggestions down in the comments, and I can adjust where appropriate. Well, thanks for watching, I do hope you enjoyed, thanks, and goodbye. An additional thank you to LHPL3 as well as my other members for supporting the channel.